From a very splash-free mountain, Misha and Diane are watching Santa Barbara. Welcome to week 30 of Misha and Diane watch Santa Barbara. Will this be the end of a beloved character?
I wouldn't bet on it.
We've just watched episode, yesterday watched episode, it was 2 days ago, 143 of Santa Barbara. Original air date, February 18th, 1985. We were on a Monday show. It's the week after Valentine's Day week in the real world, and it's the 16th of February in Santa Barbara. And as you remember from Friday, the car explodes. Peter has opened the door is in his hand, the car explodes. He must be dead. Kelly goes running, finds Peter's body quite a few feet away from the car, blown there by the force of the explosion. Kelly goes to check if he's alive by putting her hands to his neck to feel for a pulse, and Peter grabs her! He somehow survived an exploding car! So Kelly escapes pretty easily because he's been blown up. He was shot, then he had his IV ripped out, then he was stabbed, then he was axed, then he was injured by a shoe, and now he's been blown up.
Mm-hmm.
So he's actually received more injuries than Peter Campbell on Soap did when he was shot, stabbed, strangled, suffocated, and bludgeoned.
More lives than Rasputin at this point.
So Kelly goes running in the desert, now a little more able to keep away from Peter because he's just lying there. CC is in the chopper, and he sees the burning car and calls Cruz. And for about half this episode, we only hear CC on the radio, so we're not actually even sure if CC's physically going to be in this episode.
Shouting over a chopper as he does.
This is CC Capwell! In that way that he last shouted when he was Peter Mark Richmond. So Cruz, Eden, and Joe get the location, and they don't really need the location. There's a burning car. It's, putting smoke in the air. Joe decides to take the Jeep alone and leave Eden and Cruz at honeymoon house number 2. And they were worried about it getting dark earlier in the last episode, but doesn't actually get dark during the search at all.
And we have to say that really all the scenes in the desert of Peter pursuing Kelly, it seems, to be perfectly light out, like maybe the middle of the afternoon light even.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And we actually see out Mason's window at one point, through the Capwell presidential suite window, and it's very bright looking in Santa Barbara. So I guess even though they're worried about it getting dark, maybe it was still afternoon. So Joe finds Kelly wandering in the desert. So he carries her back to the Jeep. Who knows how far that was, but they're happily reunited.
Actually, I liked the way they did that, where we see Kelly running and we see this figure of a man calling to her, and she's running. She doesn't know it's Joe. And then, I don't know about you, but I think I sort of realized at the same time Kelly did that this is Joe. It's not Peter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Peter had to abandon the Jeep because he ended up parking at the base of a bit of a cliff, and he could see the smoke. Sorry, Joe. He could see the smoke above the cliff, so he had to sort of climb up there and go on foot from that point.
Mm-hmm.
So Cece convinces Cruz to go out, so he leaves Eden in charge of the radio, and Cruz goes back to that trailer. Now, he'd already had reports about what was found on the trailer, but Cruz checks it again. He finds the bloody axe, he finds the chainsaw, and I realized that Peter had also bandaged his shoulder where Kelly hit him with the axe. So Eden comes on the radio and says she's actually scared to man the radio not because she's scared Peter will somehow find her, but that she'll get a call that Kelly's been found dead.
Yeah.
So she ends up joining Cruz in the trailer.
And we actually hear something from Cruz that in this episode that we don't hear very much, and because Cruz is such a sort of rational, get-it-done guy. But he keeps saying, I just know Kelly's all right. Mm-hmm. He's got this sort of instinct or just this premonition that Kelly's all right.
So Cece comes over the radio to say that they found Joe and Kelly.
Yeah.
So Cruz needing a hug, as you can imagine. Back in Santa Barbara, Lionel is telling Sophia, disguised as Suzanne Carlisle, that he was in Channing's room when Channing was killed. And then Mason enters the interrogation room and demands to know how they know each other. And Lionel covers for Sophia, and he says, you have no right to interrogate my visitors. Mm-hmm. Mason claims that he does have the right, and he wants to know why she's staying at the Capwell Hotel under the name Contessa Armonti. And she doesn't answer that, and Lionel gets into a little bit of a scuffle with Mason, and I guess raises his arms. I think, is he handcuffed? Anyway, he ends up knocking Mason under the chin and knocking Mason unconscious. Or maybe he knocks him down and he hits his head and goes unconscious. So they have Mason lying unconscious on the floor of the interrogation room. So
in this little scene, Mason's kind of the opposite of Peter, who seems indestructible at this point, where we have Mason, who's basically a little flick, and he's down and out cold for most of the scene. And I didn't see him hit his head, and Lionel was not handcuffed. So they've positioned the camera in such a way that you can't really see what Lionel has done to Mason, but it's dramatic, and Lane Davies kind of throws himself backwards, and he's flat on the floor for most of this scene. Mm-hmm.
So if he had been conscious, he would have heard a lot of stuff. He would have heard Lionel calling Sophia,
yeah,
instead of Suzanne, and he tells her that he was searching Channing's room when Philip and Cece entered the room, and Lionel hid. Mm-hmm. And Cece was saying, I thought I heard someone up here, and I don't like all these people in the house, and who knows who's going to come in here and try and steal some souvenirs. So he orders Philip to lock the room. Mm-hmm. And that's how Lionel got trapped in Channing's room. He was locked in there, and he actually heard a woman scream. And then we hear Philip saying, "Oh my God, Channing's been shot." So that is where Lionel was at the time of the murder. He was locked in Channing's room. So I think we now know for sure that Lionel wasn't the killer, assuming we can believe his flashbacks.
Now, what did you think about Lionel so aggressively defending Sophia when Mason was conscious, and trying to keep Mason from probing her with questions about her identity?
Well, I mean, as he had said to Warren, he had said it's good that Eden knows, because then if it gets out, she can't blame me. So I think the main thing is that he has to show Suzanne that he has no intention of revealing her secret, or Sophia, right? Mm. That's what I'm thinking, but it seemed a little more, just the way it was being played so strongly.
Yeah, I could kind of understand there was maybe a bit of strategy there, but I have to admit I was a little bit puzzled by it as well.
Mm-hmm. It seemed very adamant. Defensive.
And we just haven't seen Lionel this adamant about. I mean, he's been protesting his innocence for a long time, but whenever anyone in his family comes to visit or whatever, he's always very jovial, and with Mason he always acts kind of exasperated. So to me, I don't know if there's maybe a bit more there than we're being told, or what, but it just seemed a bit odd to me.
Mm-hmm. It did seem extreme.
Mm-hmm.
So Suzanne leaves, and Mason finally wakes up, and Lionel makes some amusing comments about how he fell over.
Yeah.
Mason, of course, threatens to have, everyone brought in on charges.
Mason seems oddly all-powerful and completely helpless in these sorts of situations, in that he seems to be able to just lock people up and send whole brigades of police officers pursuing them, and he's able to keep Lionel in custody with no real evidence. And yet he couldn't really do anything about Peter, and he doesn't seem to have any kind of backup in these situations, these odd situations he finds himself in.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you'd think it would be a bit of a problem for what is he, a deputy district attorney or whatever, to be knocked out by a prisoner.
Mm-hmm. He says, "Oh, I've got Miss Carlisle as a witness." Then he notices she's gone.
Yeah.
So, at the Lockridge mansion, Brick is having trouble wrapping a gift for Amy. And Minx comes in. We haven't seen her in quite a while. She says, "We usually have Laken wrap the presents." And then she asks who the girl is, and he says it's Amy Perkins. And she knows all about Amy, knows that she's in the hospital, knows that she's pregnant, knows that it's another man's baby. So I don't know how she got that information. So, and she says to her, "You can't fall in love with Amy." And then she says, "You're falling into the role of taking care of a lone woman, the way you took care of your mother when your father left." So Brick's, once again taken aback that he knows so much. She knows so much about his family life. He says that his mother had told him his father was off working a lot, mm-hmm. but he realizes, looking back now, that he only ever saw him 3 or 4 times, and the last time he saw him, he was 6 years old. So I think Minx pretty much tells him he was a deadbeat, which he's probably worked out at this point on his own.
Mm-hmm.
He realized how much Minx has been keeping tabs on him his whole life. And I guess she changes the subject by saying, "I need to see Lionel immediately." And he says, "Well, we're going by the hospital first to give Amy her present and check on her." So she tells him to go get the car, and Brick realizes, for some reason, you need me more than I need you. So he goes to get the car, and she says, "You're right. I need you. I love you." So this is interesting.
This whole exchange gave me a little ray of hope when she said that he couldn't possibly be in love with Amy, because it made me think that at some point that would be proved right and we could wrap up the Amy storyline.
Because Minx is in love with him herself, and that's why.
Well,
That's what Augusta thought.
Yeah. Actually, and this is kind of, as we were just saying with Mason, it's another example of a character who's both all-powerful and completely helpless, in that we have Minx seems to have these almost godlike powers when it comes to Brick, knowing every aspect of his life and apparently everything he's doing at any time. But she doesn't know her paintings are counterfeit, as far as we know.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't know any of the stuff Lionel's been up to over all these years. Certainly didn't know anything about Elizabeth. Didn't probably know anything about his relationship with Sophia. So there's...
She's been spending all of her time spying on Brick Wallace.
I guess so. As for the relationship with Brick, well, you've assured me that they are actually going to reveal it, so
mm-hmm.
That's good to know.
Yeah, it's not a dropped storyline.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Not sure how quickly they reveal it. They certainly have been... It's been going at a snail's pace. So. Mason goes to the presidential suite. Now, this is what I've been hoping, and we were having a discussion off camera as to whether or not Mason knows about the secret room. And I somehow had in my head that Veronica had showed him the secret room, but you don't recall that. So
I don't think he does.
Maybe I mixed up some other scene.
No, I don't think he does, and I would very, very much like him to know about it because, as I've said many times, I think this would be perfect for him, but I don't think he knows about it.
Because now that he is interested in the goings-on of the person in that presidential suite, it would be perfect if he just popped in that room and waited for Marcello to call her Sophia. So, but he goes to the suite, and inside, Sophia hasn't got a wig on. When she realizes it's Mason, she's a bit concerned as to what she should do, but it makes sense for her to put on the Contessa Armonti wig and glasses, because that's who everyone expects to be in that room. So she puts that on and lets Mason in, but she doesn't bother putting on the Italian accent, like she did with Cece.
Yeah.
And then Mason, is trying to question her, but she's very evasive. And at one point he says that she looks familiar, and she says, "Oh, well, I travel a lot." And Mason says, "Well, other than a trip to Nice last year, I didn't travel that much." And then he wants to know about the why this, she's pretending to write a book, and she says she actually is a writer. And then he says, "Why drop the title and assume the identity of Ms. Carlyle?" And she doesn't really answer that. She just assures him that she's not after the Capwell money. If that's what he's thinking. Because he says, "Oh, we've been fooled by a whole lot of fake royals in the past." And then the phone rings to get Sophia out of a bad conversation. And it's Cliff. I don't know what happened to Sam, but it's Cliff now, who phones Mason to say that Kelly's been found. And when he relays that information to the Contessa, she says, "Thank God."
Yeah.
Now, the way she says Mason, I just can't imagine that Mason doesn't immediately remember Sophia calling him Mason in that way, because the way she says Mason is very distinctive. So
he definitely does have his suspicions. You can see he's looking at her and watching her very closely. He hasn't put it together yet.
So, he says he has to go. If he does know about the room, I can imagine that he should stop in there, but we will see in the next episode. Back in, I wanted to say Arizona, but it's actually still California. Back in Palm Springs, desert adjacent. Kelly is on a stretcher, and after her ordeal, she's a bit zombie-like. And then the word comes that they didn't find Peter Flint anywhere near that car. They couldn't find Peter. And Kelly tells Joe that the police better kill him. She says, "He did impossible things out there. Twice I thought he couldn't move another inch, and he kept coming." And now, Lacey Daly has picked up a hitchhiker, and now it's dark. So it's now, finally, the dark that they were all worried about for the last few days has come. She's talking about how, her family would be really disturbed if they found out she picked up a hitchhiker in the middle of nowhere. She's got the radio on, and they hear about the Carnation Killer, and his name's Peter Flint, and he's 6 feet tall and blonde. And she looks over at her hitchhiker, and Peter looks back at her.
Sort of creepy look on his face, yeah.
So, has Peter got another victim on the horizon?
Well, in Lacey's favor, she's not really blonde, so that might help her. And we were speculating off camera whether Peter would have had a carnation on him that would have survived all of the troubles he's been through.
It's a bit singed, but...
Yeah.
And it's been hacked by a hatchet, but like a magician pulling carnations out of different secret pockets. I mean, one part of me wonders if, Peter could vanish now, and, we always wonder, could he come back to Santa Barbara someday, The other part wonders, will we see the continuation of this scene?
Or is this, as you say, maybe this... I've wondered that myself, if they'll let him go for a while, and then when they need to perk up a storyline during sweeps in a couple of years, bring him back suddenly.
Yeah, like the Master on Doctor Who,
Yeah.
This would be a perfect out, because he's racing away from the scene of the crime.
Then again, Kelly is still vulnerable, I guess. So he knows where she lives. So we could see him pop up again. I don't know.
Well, excluding Lacey Daly and Peter Flint, we have lost another cast member today. Who do you think it is?
Another cast member. Was it someone who appeared in the episode?
Yes, this is the final episode for one of our actors.
Oh, wow. Well, let me think who our actors were today. Maybe one of the policemen?
It's a more high-level actor than walk-on policeman.
Ah, okay. Well, who did we see? We saw Cruz and Eden and Joe and Kelly. And we saw Mason and Sophia and Lionel.
It's someone that's been on the show since episode 1.
Well, I'm going to guess maybe we're seeing the last episode of the actress playing Minx.
This actor's, after 15 appearances, his final episode was in a flashback.
Oh. Are we getting a new CC?
Rosa, in addition to her current duties, plus being a gardener, will now be answering the door at the Catwell residence, because that was Philip's last episode.
Oh,
and
okay.
Ian Abercrombie will next be seen as Mr. Pitt on Seinfeld.
Ah, okay.
I'm sure he does things in between the two. Wasn't he on Birds of Prey? Or am I...
Maybe.
Didn't he play Alfred Pennyworth in something?
He could have.
Probably. So anyway, yeah, that's another original cast member gone. With no fanfare, and in a flashback at that. So his last present day appearance was probably a few weeks ago. Was he at the wedding? I don't even remember if Philip was at the wedding. So the cast is slowly... I mean, this goes to my theory that this is a house cleaning time for the writers, and that they are moving forward with new directions, and maybe they think Rosa is sufficient to be answering the door at the Catwell mansion. So. Although, flashbacks to the day of Channing's murder, so it'd be surprising that they don't need Philip anymore. So I guess that is it for Monday. Starting a new exciting week. We'll see if Peter Flint gets out of town and things settle down a bit on the Kelly Catwell storyline, while things are heating up on the Sophia storyline.
Well, I imagine if Peter Flint continues to be a factor, we will be seeing more victims pile up as well, since he doesn't seem to be getting any better.
Depending on if we pick up where we left off, Lacey Daly is probably, well, not blonde, but if he says, Kelly, you've dyed your hair, then we know a lot of people could be in trouble. Could be a whole new set of brunettes on the chopping block. So we'll find out after we watch episode 144 of Santa Barbara. This week's spotlight is on Ian Abercrombie, who played Philip, the Catwell butler, on 15 episodes of Santa Barbara. Ian Abercrombie was born September 11th, 1934, in Grays, Essex. He was married twice, first to actress Elizabeth Romano from 1956 to 1978, and then to Gladys Abercrombie from 1984 until his death. He started acting during World War II and danced on stage in Europe and acted in the United States beginning in 1955.
He was drafted into the U.S. Army in 1957, directing plays as part of the Special Services. Early credits include Dragnet in 1969, followed by roles in TV shows such as Get Smart, Columbo, Barnaby Jones, Cannon, The $6 Million Man, The Hardy Boys' Nancy Drew Mysteries, Battlestar Galactica, Mrs. Columbo, Knots Landing, Voyagers, Happy Days, Three's Company, and Fantasy Island. During the same time period, he appeared in movies such as Young Frankenstein, The Prisoner of Zenda, and Ice Pirates. Beginning with Episode 1, Abercrombie appeared as Philip the Capwell butler in 15 episodes of Santa Barbara. His first appearance in Episode 1 was as part of a flashback to 1979, where he sported a mustache. His final appearance in Episode 143 was as part of the flashback to later that same day, during Channing's murder, in which he did not have a mustache. After Santa Barbara, he appeared in movies Addams Family Values, The Lost World Jurassic Park, Mouse Hunt, Wild Wild West, and TV series Silver Spoons, Foley Square, The Colbys, L.A. Law, Moonlighting, It's Gary Shandling's Show, Falcon Crest Dynasty, Alf, 21 Jump Street, Generations, Twin Peaks, The Flash, Cafe Americain, Murphy Brown, Sybil, Babylon 5, News Radio, Star Trek Voyager, Days of Our Lives, Green Lantern the Animated Series, as Mr. Pitt in Seinfeld, and as Chancellor Palpatine in Star Wars The Clone Wars. His best-known role was as Alfred Pennyworth in Birds of Prey. Abercrombie died on January 26, 2012, at the age of 77 in Hollywood, California.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We've watched episode 144 of Santa Barbara. Originally aired Tuesday, February 19th, 1985. Lucy Daly is brought into the police station. So she did not get killed by Peter Flint. Yay.
She has a warning for Kelly, however.
Eden and Cruz spent the night together at his houseboat. Joe calls to say they're going back to Sally's apartment. Cruz says that Mason needs a statement from them. Cruz says that he'll be going into work, but instead he goes back to bed with Eden. And we hear their song for the first time, The Change in Me Is You. And then they get a call, and they find out that Peter's alive. So they all go to the police station. Joe and Kelly are there too. And Lucy tells them that she jumped out of the truck after hearing the news report. And she ended up walking 20 miles in the desert. And she tells Kelly that she thinks Peter is coming for her.
Yeah.
And then Eden tries to tell Kelly to get a gun. She had taken one of Cece's guns for herself, which she shows Kelly she has in her purse. Kelly declines a gun, saying she's too frightened. So
I actually don't think this is a bad move on Kelly's part. I mean, we'll see how it plays out plot-wise, but it seems to me, especially in his crazed and seemingly invincible state, that Peter could easily take a gun away from her and use it to threaten her even more.
Wondering if Eden's gun will come into play in the future.
Yeah,
whether
possibly.
with Peter or in another story.
Yeah.
Amy's baby is fine. It magically cured itself over the weekend, so that's good. She's ready to have Brick drive her home, but then she spots Elizabeth Peel apparently holding Brick's hand out in the waiting area. Well, Elizabeth Peel is actually slipping him a list of things that she wants him to get for Warren. So Amy calls Jade to pick her up instead, so at least we see Jade.
Yeah, that was nice to see Jade.
We saw Missy Brennan in some flashbacks on Days of Our Lives this week. Couldn't quite find out online what year that was. It was her wedding day, but I think Jennifer's been married more than once. So
she looked a little bit older than in that first clip you showed me.
So it must have been a few years, I think.
Yeah. But she's been in that role for a long time.
So, of course, Brick and Amy argue, and Brick doesn't know what Amy's upset about. He ends up going to her house, but is attacked on her front porch by two thugs that Jeff hired to pay Brick back for the black eye. Well, he turns the tables on them, gets them to tell him where Jeff is, and he goes to the State Street bar and punches Jeff in the other eye.
Mm-hmm.
So now Jeff has two black eyes.
I don't really have much to say about the Amy and Brick storyline, because it just keeps happening.
Lionel tells Sophia she has 1 day left. He said, I gave you 10 days, you got 1 day left. So that was actually February 1st that he gave her that ultimatum. And today is February 17th in story time. So I guess that means February 1st in our time was February 7th in their time.
Maybe, yeah.
So it was the day after Veronica was killed, I believe. So we'll see what it says on her tombstone someday. Augusta arrives and is told that Lionel is with one woman and there's another one already waiting. They have a monitor, though, where they can monitor the entrance to the interrogation room. So she watches Eden waiting outside and then sees Sophia come out disguised as Suzanne and start arguing with Eden. So Augusta sneaks down there to eavesdrop on them.
Yeah.
And she overhears the fact that Suzanne, Eden says Suzanne is one of Lionel's old lovers. She doesn't, of course, realize that it's Sophia. So she ends up following Suzanne to her car and getting in her car. And then Suzanne claims she went to college with Lionel to explain how she knows him. Augusta then sees some blonde hair sticking out from under her wig.
Yeah, so she seems to be... It's interesting how this is something that some of the women have picked up on. So Eden was very suspicious of that wig as well. Whereas Mason, with his eagle eyes, doesn't seem to have really noticed that. I mean, he knows she wore a wig because she wore a different wig when she was being the Contessa Armonti for him, but he hasn't really spotted the blonde hairs.
Suzanne gets a bit flustered when Augusta says, well, then you know that he didn't kill anyone. Because, of course, she's been setting up Lionel this whole time. And Suzanne just tells Augusta she has no designs on Lionel. And as she drives off, Augusta knows the license plate and manages to trick someone at the rental company into giving her Suzanne's address. So then Augusta shows up at the Capitol Hotel and waits for Suzanne to come home. And then has another argument with her about Lionel. Accuses her of being one of Lionel's old mistresses. And then makes some comment about how long has he been making you wear wigs? She says, why don't you ask your husband? So Augusta returns to Lionel and asks if he's had any other visitors today. He says no, apart from Eden.
Yeah, she's caught him out.
And then Lionel, starts defending Eden as a visitor, saying, oh, stop being jealous of Eden. I'm not interested in her. She doesn't have everything that you've got. And I guess it says, does the Contessa Armonti have everything? And that was the cliffhanger for that. So Lionel's somehow got to spill the beans on the Contessa.
Yeah, and I think if he doesn't, I can't quite see Augusta letting this go unless Lionel spins her a really good yarn, because, Augusta is very jealous of other women, and we've seen sort of the lengths she's gone to with Eden, and I think she would happily go to those lengths for the Contessa Armonte as well.
I have expected Augusta to find the secret room herself, so I think if she doesn't get what she wants from Lionel, she may skulk around the hotel a bit.
I think it would be funny if everyone in the cast and in town knows Sophia's secret, except for Mason and Cece.
I wonder if Augusta went to the hotel and saw Warren coming out of the secret room, then she could spell him off.
Yeah.
Peter Flint knocks out the police officer who's guarding his apartment. Goes into his apartment, packs a backpack, and a few other things. Gets his gun from the drawer, so I guess he didn't have it in Palm Springs, which makes sense since he never tried killing anyone. So I guess he had his gun at the wedding. He must have gone home to change, left his gun there, and then I guess figured he didn't need it on his honeymoon. And he takes some pills. We don't know what these pills are. We don't think they're ones that he was prescribed for his aneurysm.
As far as we know, he hasn't picked up his prescription.
But it seems to make him a bit lucid. He does hear a news report about Lucy Daly, and then shouts at the TV saying, "There was nobody in that truck. That was Kelly's truck," which is kind of hilarious. And then he realizes he's killed four people and decides to kill himself. But a vision of Kelly talks him out of it. So that's kind of funny. So Peter types up a suicide note and then leaves through the window. Then a mysterious person enters Peter's apartment building, and we just see the camera is the person's point of view, so we have no idea who it is. They see the unconscious police officer, ignore them. They go into Peter's apartment, look around a bit. They find the suicide note on the typewriter, and then they add a little something to the note. Now, this is the original note that Peter wrote. "Dear Kelly, I have finally realized what a hell I have made of your life. I'm not responsible because I'm a sick person, but I am responsible. So there's only one way to make you safe and stop the killing. Yes, I know I've killed 4 people because it says so in the paper, but the most horrible thing of all is that I don't even remember some of them. I remember Veronica. I pray to heaven that your sister Eden was not one of them, although I secretly fear that she was. I will be the 5th and last. Because I love you, Kelly, and love should give life happiness instead of take it away." Cruz gets word that Officer Mallory was found unconscious. He runs over to Peter's apartment with Eden in tow. He finds Peter's blood on the windowsill, and Eden finds the note in the typewriter. So they read it aloud, including the mysterious addition typed, which is, "And there's something else I have to tell you, Kelly. Something I've never told anyone." And then they both look in horror at what's typed next.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, who is the mysterious person who walked into Peter's apartment, and what could they have added to a suicide note?
Well, I mean, this is the kind of thing Dominic used to do all the time. I guess we have to ask ourselves, who knows where Peter lives?
So if they added something to frame Lionel, if it was Dominic or Marcello, it would say, "I saw Lionel kill Channing," would be the obvious thing then.
Yeah.
I just think it weird that would Sophia just ignore the unconscious police officer to go in there?
Well, Sophia doesn't seem entirely stable herself in many ways, so I think she possibly could.
I don't know what Marcello would do, but it seems odd that either of them would really think to go to Peter Flint's apartment at all.
Yeah, I mean, they've never been there.
Like, why would they have gone there in the first place? Were they worried about Kelly? If so, why not leave it to Cruz or make a call to Joe saying, check out Peter's apartment?
I mean, Joe knows where Peter's apartment is, but I don't really see that being Joe's MO to do things like that.
The only other mystery person that I could think of would be Ginger, but I can't imagine what she might have added to the note that would benefit Ginger.
Now, Augusta knows where Peter's apartment is.
Right. So the reverse. If whoever typed, "I killed Channing," it could have been Augusta or Warren typing that to free Lionel. So we've got a handful of ideas. Sally Taylor, we know, has left the show. Otherwise, she'd be a good... Yeah. And they've repaired the lighting in the hallway to Peter's apartment. It's much more homey, and it's once again feels like the first floor of a building, even though we know from Veronica's trip in the elevator that it must have been much higher, unless that elevator ride went horribly awry. But when Peter walked out of his window, I mean, he may well have been on a fire escape, but the way it looked, if you'd just seen that scene, you would have guessed he was on the ground floor. But
I don't think any buildings get really high in Santa Barbara. It's not the kind of place where you have a lot of skyscrapers.
The penthouse at the Capwell Hotel is on the 5th floor. So.
Yeah.
So I have no idea who could have written that note, although those are my guesses for people who might have had an ulterior motive to add to the note and might have gone there looking for Peter. That's the only thing I could think of. And it's goodbye to Dr. Montclair now that Amy's cured. We won't see her again. And that's it for this episode. We'll be back after we watch episode 145 of Santa Barbara. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We have just watched episode 145 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired Wednesday, the 20th of February, 1985. Joe gives Callie an aspirin for her headache, and she tells him about letting Peter rape her so that he wouldn't kill her. Joe says he's glad she made that choice. Then later, Kelly wakes up from a nightmare and is convinced that Peter is alive and is coming to get her.
Which we know to be true.
Cruz and Eden, in Peter's apartment, read the fake ending to Peter's letter. That was added by someone we don't know. And it was something I've never told anyone else. I killed Channing Jr. So now, I'm trying to figure out who would have typed that.
I still think Augusta's a good candidate.
Augusta or Warren, really? I mean, Augusta's probably more familiar with Peter's apartment. And I guess if she knows Peter is on the run. But the thing is, why would she go there in the first place? I mean, this was just a fortuitous discovery, I would think.
Unless Sophia's completely off her rocker and this Dominic goes in and, if she's got a split personality or something. Because it is a very Dominic kind of move. But, I don't think Elizabeth would have done it on Warren's behalf because I think that would be a huge risk for her.
Yeah. My one thought is Marcello just wants her to come back.
Yeah.
And he did it to wrap this whole thing up and get her to agree to leave town.
That's another possibility.
All right, so Cruz and Eden tell the family. Ted, Eden, Kelly, Mason. Someone mentions that Gina and Cece are on the island because they were talking about a cruise or a trip to an island or something. Eden says to Mason that he'll have to let Lionel out of prison. In other news, Jackie drops her mail as Laken and Jackie arrive at the Perkins house. Wasn't quite clear what they were doing there, but Ted knew they were there because when he goes to look for Laken to tell her the good news, that's where he goes.
My only assumption is that maybe Laken was helping her take home some stuff from school or something like that. I kind of miss the days when Laken was hanging out with Jade. Now that she's hanging out with her teacher more, it's not quite as interesting for me.
That school really encourages teachers to hang out with students, I guess.
Yeah, well, Peter Flint certainly did when he was a physics teacher there.
So he finds the letter that Jackie dropped as he goes up the porch and absent-mindedly puts it in his pocket. He hugs Laken after telling her the good news that her father's innocent. But then she pulls away, and then she leaves to tell Lionel the good news. Ted remembers the letter, or actually puts his hand in his pocket and notices it. She opens it right away and finds out that her husband is not coming home again, this time because he's in the hospital. And she's quite worried about why he's in the hospital, and Ted says, well, he wouldn't have been able to write you if it was that bad, and she decides to go to the Naval Administration and just find out exactly what's going on. And she finds out that her husband drank poisoned water that killed 2 other people. So, but she's a little, happier to know the truth, and as Ted said, he wouldn't have been able to write that letter if he was that bad off, so they're hoping he'll pull through. And so they go for a burger. It's a rainy night, and she's cold, and Ted takes her to a place that he had gone with Laken a lot, because he said, Laken always gets the hot fudge cake for dessert.
And I noticed that, and I don't know if this is maybe in preparation for him having some kind of relationship with Jackie, or if this is, just a change, but he is rocking a beard now.
Yes, to make him look older. Yeah,
and he's got almost the beginnings of a little bit of a mullet, which we're starting to see at that point in the 80s. So, I'm wondering if this is to make possibly an affair between a teacher and her student a little less gross.
I mean, it's a tradition at Lyman Prep, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, I can only assume that her husband's going to die.
Yeah,
because she doesn't seem like the type to be cheating on him.
Yeah, apparently.
But they'll get closer maybe while he's sick, and then when he dies.
Yeah, that's a thought, unless it's that he got the dysentery or whatever he has from drinking contaminated water at a bordello or something in the South Pacific.
But I think we're correct in our trajectory of where this is heading. Now, Augusta had a very busy day in Santa Barbara. As you recall, she was confronting Lionel about the Contessa Armonti. Lionel thinks quickly and says he doesn't know any Contessa Armonti. And then Augusta says, well, what about Susie Carlyle, girl reporter? He says, well, I do know her.
He says very carefully that he hasn't had basically relations with them, right?
No, he actually says, I haven't slept with Contessa Armonti.
Yeah.
And he says, I haven't slept with Suzanne Carlyle.
Exactly. So he's sort of very technically being truthful, but not really.
Yeah. And, of course, Augusta reveals all the bits of the, Lionel says, I met her in Europe because she wanted to buy some art. And she says, oh, well, that's interesting because she told me you met at college. He says, yeah, I did meet her originally at college, and then again in Europe when she wanted to buy some art. So this Augusta's not buying either of their stories about this at all. She ends up going back to visit the Contessa, trying to get something more out of her. And once again, the Contessa's, not giving up anything, and eventually says she has to go to take a shower and change. Into whom? Asks Augusta, which I thought was great.
Yeah.
And then Augusta thinks to herself that the Contessa looks very familiar. Then she goes to visit Eden at the Capwell's house in the study, and confronts her about her argument with the Contessa. Eden, of course, doesn't want to reveal that Sophia's alive, so she tells Augusta that she should be worried about Lionel and the Contessa. And that's as much as she wants to say about that, though it does end up turning to discussion about Sophia. Eden's been toying with this photo of Sophia and looks like maybe Channing that was on the desk in the study, and she's taken it out of its frame, and she ends up tearing it in half to punctuate her discussion about Sophia with Augusta, which takes Augusta back a little bit. Eden, leaves the study, and Augusta picks up a photo and looks at it and puts it in her purse or her pocket, I guess.
Eden also says several times, I think more to herself than to Augusta, but she sort of says, maybe you're the one to get rid of her.
Yeah.
I think she's sort of hoping that Augusta will run Sophia out of town somehow. Yeah.
So at some point off screen, I guess, Laken tells Augusta about Peter Flint's confession.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite possible that Augusta went home right after this because our next door neighbors found out about it and then jetted off to the police station.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if Brick is chauffeuring her to all these places, or if she's doing this all on her own. So she demands to know why Lionel is still in jail, and Mason says, well, the paperwork is in progress. The wheels of justice turn slowly.
Except when they don't.
So Mason jokes, I'm surprised you haven't bribed me to keep Lionel in here, to keep him away from the Contessa. And he mentioned that the Contessa seems familiar to him, and Augusta says, well, I hate to agree with you, but I think the same thing. And then Lionel is brought in, and Mason says, I've done you the courtesy of arranging for you to leave the back way. He goes, no, I came in here the front door with all the photographers, and that's how I'm going to leave. And he tells Augusta to have the photographers brought in, because the show's about to start.
Mm-hmm.
Mason tries briefly to talk him out of that by saying, there's still some things I could charge you with. And he says, don't even think about it. You'll look like a bigger fool than you already are.
Mm-hmm.
So Lionel and Augusta get home, and Laken has decorated the place with the balloons and a big banner that says, welcome home, Buster. Welcome home, Dad. And Laken goes off to do something, and Lionel goes off to have a shower, and Augusta finds the photo of Sophia in her pocket and starts to think and starts having one of those flash things where she flashes on Sophia's face, flashes on the Contessa's face, and realizes that they look similar. And she starts to draw with a black pen on the photo and says to herself, it can't be possible. The Contessa is Sophia Capwell.
Mm-hmm. Proving that Augusta is a better investigator than Mason.
Yep. She figured it out before him.
We did have a nice scene with Mason, actually, near the beginning of the episode when they discover Peter's suicide note and the little fake addition at the end. And Mason realizes that if it was Peter Flint who did kill Channy, then, he had done a deal to keep Peter out of prison.
Mm-hmm.
And had inadvertently put all of these other lives in danger when Peter turned out to be the Carnation Killer. Got a really nice shot of Mason staring out this sort of rainy window.
Mm-hmm. The voiceover of him admonishing himself.
Yeah.
Blaming himself for Veronica's death, really, too.
Yeah.
He was part of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a really good scene. So this is a great episode, and it was basically an Augusta episode, I would say. She kind of drove everything.
And not an Amy episode at all.
Which was nice, even though we were at the Perkins house.
Mm-hmm.
And, so we will see. There was probably a bit of a prop issue with the pen that Louis Sorel used to draw on the photo, because I think it was dried out. Because when we saw the photo, she barely managed to do anything to it. But I think the implication was that she would have darkened the hair or
maybe
drawn on the
glasses.
glasses. So I suspect that will be rectified in between episodes. And when next we see the reprise of that scene, we'll see a fully drawn-on photo of Sophia looking like the Contessa.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be exciting, I think. I think Sophia's identity is going to be revealed very soon. Lionel has no longer got a reason to keep it a secret.
Mm-hmm.
Augusta maybe would rather have Sophia out of town, just like Eden. So maybe that will delay things. But once Mason finds out, I think he's going to, find a way to rub it into CC that, your beloved Sophia hid from you for 15 years. Guess she didn't love you that much. And Gina won't be too happy to find out about Sophia coming back to life.
Yeah, when you think about it, the pace is quickened in terms of people knowing who Sophia is, and it's almost every other episode now. It seems like that
I mean,
identity is revealed.
Who else is there that could... I think Mason will be the next one.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's not too many... I mean, I guess Kelly or Ted could find out. And I guess having Cece out of town would delay him from finding out. So that actually the family could find out slowly but surely without Cece finding out and then have another big reveal. Because I think Cece's the big reveal. I mean, the kids, yeah, but I just think it's going to be maybe a one a day. People will find out.
So we've got Eden, Lionel, Warren, Augusta.
I don't know if
Of course,
Elizabeth knows.
Marcello.
Elizabeth doesn't know.
No, and
Marcello.
maybe doesn't care. I don't know. So anyway, yeah, I think we're closing in on that.
So we'll be back for another episode after we watch episode 34 of The Invaders and episode 146 of Santa Barbara. See you then.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We've watched episode 34 of The Invaders. And Charles Bateman was on the show. He wasn't tonight's special guest star, but he was first in the closing credits. And so we got a chance to see what C.C. Capwell's real hair color would have looked like around 1968.
Yeah.
And it seems to be a little lighter brown than when they dye it for the flashbacks. I also noticed he was balding a little bit back here, so I'm suspecting perhaps some of what we see even in white-haired Charles Bateman is not entirely his own. So it's fun to see one of our actors in another role.
And at an earlier age.
We also watched episode 146 of Santa Barbara, which aired Thursday, February 21st, 1985. And Warren and Elizabeth wake up in the barn, each in their own sleeping bag, so it doesn't look like anything romantic has happened at all between them. Later in the day, Warren is banging away at something with a hammer for some reason, and he hits his thumb. She ends up trying to kiss it better, but he seems kind of oblivious that she seems to have fallen for him.
We see some livestock in this barn, too.
That's true. I think Elizabeth wakes up to be surrounded by chickens, which somewhat startles her. They get some eggs, but aren't sure what to do with them. So she decides to try and figure out how to have a bath while Warren goes out to get some breakfast. And he comes back all excited with a newspaper, revealing that Peter Flint has confessed to the murder and that he can go home.
Yeah.
So she tells him to take her car. She's just going to hang around and paint all day, and to pick her up at 5 p.m. So I'm wondering if this is going to start out to be something between them. I mean, Warren told her he's going to try and look for another girl like Summer, which is not really Elizabeth. But I don't know. She seemed interested to me.
Yeah, she's already kind of set up the barn in a little more homey way than either Laken or Kelly managed when they were staying in a barn. So she does seem to be ready to stay on a little bit. We just have to hope that the ailing Peter Flint doesn't come across that barn.
That's true. It's kind of far out of town, though, so we'll see. Lionel is talking in his sleep at home, in bed, and Augusta's listening to him mutter about some woman and thinking about Sophia and the Contessa being the same person. When they wake up, he tells her he's got an appointment with the stockbroker. She tells him she has a dance class. Neither of these things are true.
They may as well be back in the circle of truth.
So Lionel immediately goes to the Capwell Hotel, where he runs into Mason, gets in some digs, and then Cece and Gina finally arrive from their flight. Now, Mason has been chomping at the bit to tell Cece how wrong he's been about him, and Lionel begs Mason to be the one to tell him.
Yeah.
And Cece seems to let him. Mason tries to interrupt a few times, but he basically lets Lionel tell Cece that Peter Flint has confessed to the murder of Channing, which dumbfounds Cece and Gina as well. It's quite close to Gina. Lionel then goes up to the 5th floor. Now, Augusta has arrived in the meantime and sees that the elevator Lionel's in has gone to the 5th floor. So Augusta actually hears Lionel and Sophia at the door talking. Lionel ends up barging into the suite and telling Sophia the good news and showing him the paper. She doesn't really quite believe it until Lionel phones Mason and makes him, confirm to her that that the paper is true. And Sophia wonders how she could have been so mistaken about seeing Lionel in the mirror. And Lionel actually seems to be fairly good-natured about it, saying, you had a lot on your mind, you were going to reveal yourself to be alive to your son, and you hated me so much.
Yeah, I think he makes a good point, too, where he said, at one point he says, you've had to have it be me. Like, that was the only way you were willing to see it. And now that she has direct evidence, I think she's reconsidering some things.
Augusta sends the bellhop up with a note for the Contessa, the first part of which reads, I saw what happened to you on May 3rd, 1969. I saw you on the boat. So this is Augusta's plan to prove that it's Sophia, because she figures only Sophia would respond to that note. If the Contessa was someone else, she wouldn't understand it. So Sophia hides the ending of the note from Lionel. And back at the Capwell mansion, Cece tells Mason that he botched the whole Channing investigation for 6 years. And why didn't you investigate Peter Flint properly when he came into our lives? And then Mason responds with, well, I intended to, but then you stopped me because you said anyone working at Lyman must be of the highest caliber. So this is quite hilarious, since Lyman's letting through a lot of duds.
Yeah.
So Cece doesn't in any way accept responsibility for this. He says, oh, you should have overridden me. And this whole day has not in any way improved the relationship between Cece and Mason at all.
No, and I found Cece and Gina's reaction quite interesting because, in a way, you'd think they would be relieved that, this apparently has given them some closure. And it's not one of their nearest and dearest who had anything to do with it. But I think Cece is really, I think he's really startled and really, I think it's rubbed him a bit raw, the fact that this was someone he had actually let into his home and invited into the family. It wasn't just a family member who he had been stuck with by fate. It was someone he actually brought in. And so I think that's part of it. I did just want to add as an aside, I find it kind of interesting that Cece was so willing to accept a teacher. I would have expected this more if Peter had claimed to be from some old money family in New York and, had all this pedigree. Whereas a teacher's, I would have thought Cece might have thought was a bit beneath the Capwell name as well.
I can only assume my previous theory about Peter blackmailing Mr. Bottoms to get the job means that Mr. Bottoms really put in a good word with Cece regarding Peter at the time.
Yeah.
That's believable.
Also, just a side note, it's kind of ironic in a way because I was a teacher myself many years ago, and actually private school teaching is not quite as desirable for teachers often because it's not unionized, so it's not as well paid. It doesn't have the benefits or the job security that a public school teaching job will often have. So sometimes some private schools will have a little bit harder time hiring people. So maybe that's how Peter got in. But it's kind of interesting that Cece would assume that it's only the best and brightest who would teach at a private school, whereas sometimes that's not so much the case.
Interesting. So a body is washed up on the beach of Santa Barbara. We see a blonde man face down on the beach. We're thinking, this can't be the end of Peter Flint. Maybe he's still alive. A couple of surfers show up, assuming they're surfers, based on what appears to be wetsuits, because we only see them from the knees down. And they proclaim that the body is dead. So they don't do that much investigation of the body. They look down and say, he's dead. And then Mason gets that call. A man in his 20s is washed up on shore and matching Peter's description. So he tells Cece, he can tell Kelly and Joe to let down their guard and call off all the other extra security, but not until I've identified the body for sure. So I fear something may go wrong with this scheme. Cece's already angry with Mason during this conversation for taking calls at his house and such. So Cece tells Mason to leave, and Mason says, with pleasure. So I have a feeling that maybe someone might be calling off the guards too soon on the Catwell side. And who will Cece blame? Himself?
Yeah, no.
So this is interesting. I'd been reading an interview with Stephen Meadows where he said he was 35 at the time. And of course, Robin Wright was 17 at the time. And they purposely hid that fact from the press to make it seem like they were closer in age. Because I think Kelly's supposed to be
in her mid-20s, maybe?
Well, 5 years after high school graduation, so 21 even, 22. And so they kind of cheated his age as being mid-20s, although, you've got to assume that if a guy who's in his mid-20s now was teaching physics 6 years ago at a prep school when he was in his late teens, it seems a bit suspicious. So once again, Lyman maybe wasn't doing it full. But Antonio Fiorno may well be 35.
Yeah,
and Peter
that's
Flint
true.
Pretending he was in his mid-20s,
Because Stephen Meadows does look quite youthful. So.
But you definitely knew he was older than Robin Wright.
Oh, definitely,
So Lionel and Augusta arrive home after their morning out. Each lie to the other about where they've been. How was breakfast with the stockbroker? Oh, great. Can I get some breakfast? We just had breakfast. Oh, we just had juice and coffee, so I need a second breakfast. And Lionel asks Augusta about her dance class, and she mentions something about toe shoes, and he says, I thought you were taking jazz. So Lionel phones Sophia, because he wants to discuss that note a little more. And Sophia says, I didn't read you the end of it. The writer of the note wants me to meet them. And Lionel says, I'm sure it's a trap, don't do it. But Sophia won't tell him the details. Warren comes home. So that's exciting, but before they can celebrate, Augusta says she's got an appointment, which is to go to the State Street Saloon and wait for the Contessa. And she hopes the Contessa doesn't show. She's hoping that the note was meaningless to her and that she's not Sophia, but the Contessa arrives.
Yes. And, I have to say, when, listening to Lionel and Augusta having their little banter before Augusta goes off to her appointment with Sophia, I was actually almost hoping at some point, and I still hope at some point, that Lionel actually does go to see his stockbroker, because I think it would be very revealing to him, all that Brick has been doing to uplift and transform the family's stocks. And I think that would give him a clue that there's something else going on in the family business that he has no idea about.
I think with all these other major storylines going on, it makes it hard for them to advance the Brick story that quickly, because all the people involved are involved in other storylines other than Minx. So I think it'll inch along a little bit.
But it does give us an indication of, why Lionel was reduced to having to sell the family paintings and then cover it up. that he's just really not a very good businessman at all, and that's not his area of interest either.
So suddenly we hear some robotic music, aneurysm music, I guess, and Peter Flint walks into a warehouse. We know it's Peter Flint because his hand is bandaged. They don't show him.
We know his
possibly
music.
not for an air of mystery, but because they didn't get Stephen Meadows to play the role, they got some, $10 an hour guy just to put a bandage on his hand for that scene. But he seems to know what he's looking for. He opens up a box and pulls out several metallic parts, and when he puts them together, Peter Flint has a machine gun. I have a machine gun now.
So he's changed his modus
I don't think
operandi.
he's planning to commit suicide at this point.
No. So I'm trying to think if there's any big events coming up that he could come in with a machine gun and,
Nothing that we know of, and nothing calendar-wise that would indicate it, but maybe there's some sort of Santa Barbara event that will be mentioned in the next episode. Some gala or something that will be thrown out. I mean, with summer gone, the museum has 0 staff members that we know of. Elizabeth's in a barn, so I don't know what it could be, but maybe it's some big thing. But makes it an excuse to be at a function with the Capwells too, possibly if it's a big charity thing.
But Peter Flint with a machine gun is not good news.
No! I'm thinking of the episode of Dynasty
I
with
know.
the Moldavian Massacre.
I'm thinking
half
of
the
that
cast
too.
could end up on the ground. So we'll see how this goes. I have no memory of the forthcoming event, so I'm excited to see what happens.
I think Peter has to stay alive long enough to potentially refute that he killed Channing.
Yeah. I mean, unless he reads the paper, he wouldn't know about it. So it'd be interesting to see how that comes out and how that affects Lionel and Warren, because they're obviously
And where that
coming out of hiding. Warren's coming out of hiding.
Where that takes Cece and Sophia. I mean, we don't know whether they would just circle straight back to Lionel and Warren, or what other things may happen before then as well. But I think that needs to come out if indeed he's not responsible. We know he didn't write it in his suicide note, so.
Yeah, we have no indication who the mystery person is. So we'll be back after we watch episode 43 of The Invaders and episode 147 of Santa Barbara. See you.
Bye-bye.
February 21st, 1985. A male Caucasian in his mid-20s with blonde hair washed up on the beach one day.
I found a body washed up on the beach, an apparent suicide. It matches Peter's description. Male Caucasian, mid-20s, blonde hair.
A couple of surfers pronounced him dead.
Preliminary examination says drowning.
He's blonde, about the right age.
He was badly cut from hitting the rocks.
The town at first assumed it was the body of suicidal Peter Flint, but it wasn't. A male Caucasian in his mid-20s with blonde hair ended up in Santa Barbara Cemetery.
Welcome back.
Hello.
Earlier today, we watched episode 43 of The Invaders, which was season 2, episode 26, the series finale, which originally aired March 26, 1968, and Mark Richman, known better to us as Peter Mark Richman, the second C.C. Capwell after Lloyd Faulkner, was one of the featured guest stars, and he had a much more prominent role than Charles Bateman did in the one we watched the other day. He actually is the antagonist throughout the entire episode, and then at the end, after they've killed off the main character's ally from the last season, he actually ends up joining the main character in his fight against the aliens. So I guess the intention was that if there was going to be a season 3, he would have been another main character.
Mm-hmm.
So that could have been a new whole season of a series for Mark Richmond. But alas, The Invaders was cancelled. And his hair was pretty much the same, I think, as when
Yeah,
we
he
saw him as
looks
CC.
quite similar, actually, to when he was CC Capua.
And then we watched episode 147 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired February 22nd, 1985. 35 years and 1 day ago.
Mm-hmm.
Mason goes to the morgue to identify Peter's body and finds it's not him. He also learns later that a machine pistol was stolen from an arms warehouse, and then later still, they confirm that Peter Flint's fingerprints were found on the box.
Yeah.
So now they know Peter is armed. Peter gets to Sally's apartment, where Joe and Kelly live, with his new machine pistol. The phone rings. Peter lets it ring for a while and eventually picks it up. I think he thinks it's Kelly. Luckily for him, I guess, whoever was phoning it hung up. Maybe it was Mason calling. He says, "Sweetheart, was that you? I'm home, and I have a little surprise for you." He brings out his perfume, smells it. So we still don't know what the origin of that perfume is.
No, but we do know that it is associated with Peter.
He seems to have a lot of it because I think he leaves it everywhere. So
Yeah, he must have bottles of that and carnations.
you'd
all
think
around
if they'd found that in his drawer, that would have been enough of a
Yeah.
tip-off, too. Mason asks Cece where Joe and Kelly are. And Cece says that he just sent them home 10 minutes ago. And Mason says that if anything happens to them, it'll be Cece's fault. And here Mason's really, doing his best to turn the tables on Cece for complaining that everything related to this matter was Mason's fault. So Cece's pretty upset that Kelly and Joe are out now with Peter still alive.
And actually, Cece does own up to it a bit more than I think that we would have perhaps expected. He does admit that he basically screwed up, which we don't see from Cece very often.
No. Does he just do it in a soliloquy, though? I don't think he says it to Mason, does he?
No, but he doesn't. Usually with Mason, he immediately turns it around to being Mason's fault or someone else's fault. And he doesn't do that this time around.
Then Cece mentions to Mason that Amy Perkins is throwing a party for Joe and Kelly that night, which Mason responds to, "A party?" And then, since he's got some time on his hands, he asks Cece if he's told Gina yet that her son's going to inherit his share of the Capwell fortune. And he says if he told her about it sooner, he might have gotten her into bed sooner. Which Cece almost hits Mason. And then Mason replies, "Go ahead, Dad, the old warrior without a war." So this is interesting, an interesting phrase. Like, it seems to imply that Cece was somehow in the military. Something we've never, heard of or thought of before. But it's interesting that Mason should bring that up. So maybe we'll find out more about Cece's past.
Mason also emphasizes that he knows that Brandon is Cece's grandson. And I was trying to think as I was watching this, because it was a long time ago that we had the whole Santana trying to find her son plot. But I was trying to remember if Mason has ever confronted Cece with this directly before.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. I think once he found out that Brandon was the beneficiary, he had figured it out at that point. Marcello Almonte enters the State Street Saloon, I think it is, where they are at this point. And Contessa Almonte is there. She has not figured out who had invited her there, because Augustus moved to the bar to keep an eye on her a bit. She tells Marcello about the note, and he immediately thinks it's a trick by Lionel. So she says, well, I'm going to wait and see what happens. And then he asks Marcello if Kelly's okay. Now, this is a very interesting conversation because all we know about Marcello so far is that he's her stepson and that he can hypnotize people very quickly. But she asks if Kelly's okay, and he gives a long diagnostic reading on, how people react differently when they've been raped, and talks about all the different possibilities, and we come to realize that he must be some sort of professional in this field. And then we find out that Dr. Marcello Armonti is one of the most respected psychiatrists in all of Europe.
Yeah, and that actually gives us perhaps a little bit of a window into his relationship with Sophia as well. I certainly came out of this episode wondering if perhaps he had been a doctor of Sophia's, or in some way, that this is, the fact that maybe she had had some mental health issues is what brought her into the orbit of the Armonti family. So I don't know, but it definitely gives us a little bit of a window into their relationship as well, and perhaps why he came with her, and why he's always really trying to keep an eye on her.
Yeah, that's true. Some insight into why he is an expert hypnotist, because clearly he uses that in his therapy. I still think he must have initially hypnotized Eden before that event in order to be able to re-hypnotize her so quickly, but we'll see if we ever get confirmation of that.
Yeah.
So she wants him to help Kelly, but he's reluctant, and it's interesting because he backs off for an odd reason, and he claims it's because Cece will suspect his motives when Sophia's identity is revealed, and I don't believe that is the case. So, and this is when Augusta approaches the Contessa, and I think Marcello has just left, but they have a discussion, and Augusta says it must be lonely traveling alone, and she says, oh, that's why I always travel with my stepson Marcello. And then Augusta suggests she might throw a small dinner party for them and get to know them. So, of course, Augusta knows at this point it is Sophia. She's certain,
that was confirmed.
And is now just playing with the Contessa to see what she'll reveal or how she'll respond to different things.
She's testing her, I think.
Now, the scene kind of shifts to the Capwell Hotel at this point. Marcello and Sophia go there, they do actually run into Joe and Kelly there too, which I'll talk about later. But at the Capwell Hotel, Augusta encounters Cece, and starts off first of all by saying that he owes the Lockridges an apology, and he says, "For what?" So Lionel was in jail for 2 months. He goes, "Well, he was maybe he was falsely accused of this crime, but, So she decides to go on the offensive and taunts him about having welcomed Peter into his family. And then Lionel says, well, Cece says he still blames Lionel for killing Sophia, and of course Augusta knows Sophia's alive, so Augusta's gleefully taunting him with these vague comments, and, must have thrown off Cece that she wasn't fearful of Lionel, being arrested for that, nor is she particularly sympathetic about Sophia's death, because of course she knows it's non-existent. She is anxious to introduce Cece to the Contessa, throw a wrench into the works, and Cece reveals, I've been trying to tell you, I already know the Contessa. Now at this point, Sophia's not putting on the accent at all. I thought she was. The first word she said, I thought she was going to try to put it back on, but she's basically Suzanne Carlyle without the Suzanne Carlyle accent now. So, I mean, I really can't imagine Cece not recognizing her voice, because it's basically her own voice that she's using.
Yeah, as I was watching this, I was trying to imagine if I had run into you 15 years from now, I think I would recognize you.
What if I had a big wig on?
Even with a wig and sunglasses.
And the stepson, Marcello.
But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why she wouldn't just do the accent. This doesn't make any sense. I mean, then maybe she was worried Augusta would say, "Oh, how come you've got the accent now?" But I mean, you know, either way, it's Cece's going to notice she doesn't have the accent now. He didn't seem to notice that.
I can only think that maybe Sophia is at some level, expecting that at some point or another she's going to be found out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think she is planning to come out to the family at some point in the near future. So, so she introduces C to the Contessa. Augusta introduces Cece to the Contessa, and then Contessa introduces Marcello to Augusta and Cece. Marcello just stares at Cece the entire time. Mm-hmm. So this, I think, links back to his previous reticence to treat Kelly. Mm-hmm. And they split up into pairs. Augusta and Marcello talk, and Cece and the Contessa talk. And the Contessa suggests Dr. Armanti's services for Kelly. Mm-hmm. She's told him all about Marcello's specialty and that he's got a special kind of treatment that seems like he's invented it. So it must be some kind of hypnotherapy. I guess.
Yeah.
And Cece says, "I'll want to check into his background further." So this is something he's learned today.
I think he's learned a lesson.
Perhaps just in the last 8 minutes since he had a talk with Mason. But he's going to check into this guy's background. So that actually may be useful to us to figure out, how he met Sophia, and this may lead to Cece discovering that Sophia is Sophia. I don't know. So, so I think he kind of agrees to have Marcello treat Kelly for any post-traumatic things that she suffers from her kidnapping.
Yeah.
Now, this is a summary of everything Kelly and Joe did in this episode, which interweaves with a lot of the things we've already talked about. Cece tells Joe and Kelly that Peter is dead, so they tell him they're going home. They go to the State Street Saloon instead, where they meet Augusta, Contessa Armanti, and Marcello. Mm-hmm. Then they visit Amy to get some food for a picnic, and she tells them she's throwing a party for them that evening. Then they go for their picnic, which is on the hood of Joe's car on a blanket near the water, and it's freezing cold. They're basically freezing.
Although, I have to say, even though they're complaining the whole time about this horrible wind and this cold breeze they're contending with, there actually isn't any evidence of it in the scene. None of the trees are blowing, and they're not blowing, but anyway, it is cold.
But it's February 23rd or 22nd, so, or in Santa Barbara days, it's probably still the 17th, maybe?
Maybe,
yeah. Or the morning of the 18th if Peter's washed up. Fake Peter.
Mm-hmm.
So they decide to have the picnic in the car. Then we see them back home at the apartment, and they decide to have the picnic in the hallway. Mm-hmm. Now, Peter's been in there this whole time. The police had actually come to the door and knocked on it earlier, and he kept playing with his new machine pistol, but they decide not to break into the apartment, even though they heard something, and they call it in, and they say, "No, your orders are to just stake out the outside," so they leave again. So they might have caught Peter. And now Peter's inside with Kelly and Joe outside. So Mason comes bursting in. "Thank God you're here." He gives them the option of going back to the Capitol Mansion or attending Amy's party that night. So Peter's listening. "Oh, Amy's having a party tonight." That's so helpful of Mason.
He's actually learned a lot of information from overhearing things from people. Mm-hmm. This is at least the second or third time that's happened.
Mm-hmm. Now, I can't quite remember the sequence of things, but by the time Joe and Kelly do go into the apartment, Peter's gone.
Yeah.
And they get changed for the party, but Amy finds... She smells the perfume. Kelly smells the perfume that Peter put on her pillow because he had put a little on the duvet and then left the bottle there. So she smells it at first and then spots the bottle. She says, "Oh my God, Peter was here." Amy is vacuuming the house, and the doorbell rings. She, of course, doesn't hear it. She turns off the vacuum, and the doorbell rings, and she still doesn't hear it because she has a Walkman on. So she takes off the Walkman, and the doorbell rings, and she opens it, and it's Peter Flint. Hello, Amy. I'm here for the party. Hope I'm not too early. So, next thing you know, they're both inside, and she's sitting down, trying to figure out how she's going to keep Peter from killing anyone. She asks him what he's going to do, and he says, wait for my bride. And she is not aware of all of the phantom marriage that he's been involved in, so he asks, who's that? And he says, it's Kelly. We've been apart for a couple of days now. I think I might surprise her. Then he takes out the machine pistol, which does not please Amy. He says, I like surprises almost as much as I like parties. So we were theorizing what kind of big Santa Barbara charity event might be happening that Peter could crash, and instead Amy Perkins decides on the spur of a moment to throw a little party in the evening at the Perkins house, and Peter Flint's
Crashed the
party and is ready to go. So I don't know if the next episode will have him in the closet with the machine pistol and Amy tied up in the back, and people will arrive and they'll wait till the place is full or something.
Yeah, and I'm assuming this party will have the rest of the Perkins and a few Capwells, because it sounds like it's just friends and family. I don't know where Brick lands on this, because Amy was really upset with him, when she saw him with Elizabeth in the hospital, but then seemed to soften a bit when she saw him getting beaten up on her lawn. So I don't know where he falls in this, but
yeah. And then there's Laken, who's friends with Teacher, who lives there. So Laken could conceivably be at this party.
Yeah, Ted could too. Jade, Danny.
Hopefully Jade and Marissa will be there.
Yeah.
Maybe Minx will show up. Well, we'll find out next week when we start week 31 of Santa Barbara and watch episode 148. Bye.
Bye-bye.
We usually have Laken wrap the presents.